The phone rang at 11:52 p.m. I was sitting in the dark kitchen, still in my church clothes, when the screen lit up. Rachel, my daughter. I answered before the second ring finished. Dad? Her voice was wrong. Tight. Fast. For one terrible second, I thought something had happened to one of the boys. Rachel, what's going on? She didn't answer right away. Then I heard her breathing change, the way it does right before someone starts crying and tries not to. Dad, turn on Channel 9. Right now. I looked across the room. The television had been on for an hour with the sound off, just for company. I picked up the remote and turned the volume up. Rachel, what am I looking at? You're on the news. I sat there blinking at my own face on the screen, snow in my eyebrows, an EMT wrapping gauze around my hand. And right then, before she said another word, I understood exactly what this was about. Because 11 hours earlier, my daughter had told me I wasn't welcome at her house for Thanksgiving. The strange part is, that wasn't even the worst thing she'd said to me. Not by a long shot. The worst things rarely come with shouting. They come quiet, almost polite, and they sit in your chest long after the call ends. 4 days before that, I'd been sitting at my own kitchen table in Mobile, Alabama, sorting through bills and trying to convince myself that retirement was the relaxing chapter everybody promised it would be. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 58 years old. I spent 31 years climbing utility poles and crawling through substations for the power company, and when my knees finally voted me out, I figured I'd earned a slow season. The house was quiet, quieter than I liked, if I'm honest with you. My wife Donna passed 8 years ago. Cancer. Quick. In the end, though it didn't feel quick while it was happening, since then I'd learned how a man lives alone. You learn to cook for one and eat the same thing twice. You learn which chair creaks and which one doesn't. You talk to the dog, and then the dog gets old too, and eventually you're just talking to an empty kitchen and calling it thinking out loud. The one bright spot, the thing that kept the whole house from feeling like a museum, was Rachel and her 2 boys. I taught that girl to ride a bike in the parking lot of Forest Hill Baptist. I sat through more middle school band concerts than any man should have to survive. I helped her move into her first apartment, then helped her move out of it when the marriage to her first husband fell apart. And I never once said I told you so, even though I'd had my doubts about him from the rehearsal dinner on. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. Rachel's name on the screen. I smiled before I even answered, the way you do with your kids no matter how old you both get. Hey, sweetheart. Hi, Dad. Something in her voice was off immediately. You know your own child's voice the way you know your own heartbeat. You don't have to think about it, you just notice when it skips. Everything all right? I asked. Yeah. Too fast. Then nothing. I leaned back in my chair and waited. Finally, she said it. Marcus's parents are flying in for Thanksgiving this year. Marcus was her husband. Good man, mostly. Worked in insurance, talked about deductibles at the dinner table like other people talk about football. His parents, Carol and Denny, had moved to Tampa 2 years back. And ever since then, they'd been trying to fold themselves into every holiday like they'd been there from the start. Carol wasn't cruel. That's the thing that made it so hard to be angry at her. She just had a gift for making sure she was never the second most important person in any room. If somebody brought a pie, Carol brought 2. If somebody mentioned a grandchild's report card, Carol's grandchild from her other son had made the honor roll with distinction. It wore a person down without ever raising its voice. Okay, I said, what time should I bring the cornbread? The line went quiet, and that quiet told me everything before she said a word. My stomach dropped before I even heard the rest. Dad. I looked out my kitchen window at the pecan tree losing its last leaves. Dad, maybe this year. She stopped. Started again. Carol and Denny are only in town for 3 days, and we want this to feel special for them since they don't get a lot of holidays with us. I didn't say anything for a second. I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. So she kept going, the way people do when silence makes them nervous. We just think it might be easier, less crowded, if you sat this one out. The words landed slow, like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples taking their time to reach the edges. I looked over at my refrigerator, at the crayon turkey my older grandson Tyler had drawn me in 2nd grade, still held up by the same magnet shaped like a catfish. Are you there, Dad? She asked. Soft. Yeah, I said. I'm here. Please don't take this personally. That one almost made me laugh. not because it was funny, but because there was no other way on God's green earth to take it. I could hear that she already knew she was hurting me. She just wanted my permission to go ahead and do it anyway. So I gave it to her. I understand, sweetheart. Another pause. Really? Sure, I said, and the lie slid out smoother than I expected it to. We talked a couple more minutes about nothing that mattered, and then the call ended. And I sat there at that table for a long time after, listening to the refrigerator hum and the house settle around me, trying to decide if I was angry. Truth is, I wasn't. Not yet. Mostly I was tired, the particular kind of tired that doesn't have anything to do with sleep. The kind where you realize you've been carrying something heavy for years and nobody around you ever noticed the weight. The next morning, I drove out to the store anyway. Bought a remote-controlled dump truck for Tyler and a paint set for my younger grandson, Caleb, who just discovered he liked drawing dinosaurs, eating other dinosaurs, which Donna would have found hilarious. For Rachel, I picked out something different. Not expensive, just true. I spent the next 2 evenings at my dining table building a scrapbook. 28 years of pictures, her christening, her t-ball years, the prom dress she cried over because the strap broke an hour before the dance, her wedding to Marcus, pictures of Tyler and Caleb as newborns that she probably forgot existed. I worked on that book until my eyes burned, and on the last page I wrote, in my own handwriting, no matter where I spend this Thanksgiving, you will always be my baby girl. By Wednesday night, the scrapbook was wrapped and sitting on my passenger seat next to the dump truck and the paint set, and I told myself I was only making a delivery. Nothing more. No speech, no guilt, no surprise visit. Just one last act of a father doing what fathers do. I had no earthly idea that before that night ended, my face would be all over the local news. Thanksgiving Eve in Mobile was warm and gray, the kind of November day the Gulf Coast specializes in, where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain. I woke up around 5, same as I had every day since retirement, because 31 years of waking up for a job doesn't just leave your body because the job did. I made coffee, fed the 2 stray cats that had adopted my back porch sometime during the spring, and stared at my phone longer than I'm proud of, half hoping it would buzz with Rachel telling me to forget the whole thing and come on over. It didn't buzz. Around 10, I loaded everything into my truck and drove across town to the subdivision where Rachel and Marcus lived, the kind of neighborhood with sidewalks nobody walks on and lawns that all look the same. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there a minute. Through the front window, I could see a tree already lit, movement inside, the shapes of people laughing. I could picture Tyler running around in his socks and Caleb showing off some new dinosaur drawing to anybody who'd hold still long enough to look at it. I almost got out, almost walked up and knocked. Instead, I carried the gifts to the porch and set them down careful. The scrapbook balanced right on top. No note. Nothing dramatic, just gifts, the way a man leaves something for somebody he loves without making them watch him do it. I stood there one more second, then turned around and drove off before anybody came to the door. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes. Still felt like an hour. Back home, I did absolutely nothing useful for the rest of the afternoon. Watched part of an Auburn game I'd already seen the ending of. Heated up some red beans that tasted like they'd been in the freezer too long and ate them anyway. Around 4, I pulled an old box down from the closet, a stack of home videos I'd had converted to disc years back, and slid one into the player. There she was. Rachel at 7 years old, missing her front tooth, riding her first bike down that church parking lot. "Don't let go," she hollered. "You've got it," my younger voice said back. Then I let go anyway. She pedaled about 15 feet before she figured out she was on her own, and the look of pure pride on her face still about broke my heart 30 years later. I watched that disc twice through. By evening, the house felt smaller than usual, the way it does on holidays when you're the only one in it. Around 7:30, I thought about doing something foolish. I thought about driving back over there, not to start a scene, not to force my way through anybody's front door, just to stand outside a minute and see the boys through the window. I actually got my keys off the hook and made it to the front door before I stopped. Because if a man has to beg his way to a seat at the table, that seat was never really his to begin with. I hung my keys back up. It hurt, but it was the kind of hurt that also felt a little bit like standing up straight after years of slouching. A little after 8, my phone buzzed, but it wasn't Rachel. It was a text from First Baptist's outreach ministry. A cold front was coming through fast and hard. temperatures dropping into the 30s, which down here counts as an emergency, and they needed hands at the shelter. We ran out of the old fellowship hall downtown. I'd been volunteering there off and on for almost 9 years, ever since Donna passed, and I needed somewhere to put my evenings besides an empty recliner. I texted back, "On my way." The shelter was already busy when I got there. A handful of men who'd been living rough had come in out of the cold, along with an elderly couple whose trailer heater had gone out. For the next couple hours, I did what needed doing. Moved cots, handed out blankets, fixed a space heater that kept tripping the breaker, made bad jokes nobody asked for. By 10:30, things had settled some. Outside, the wind had picked up, and a light rain had started freezing on contact, turning the roads slick and mean. I said my goodnights and headed home, taking it slow, since there wasn't a single soul waiting on me to hurry. About 15 minutes down the highway, I saw headlights sitting at a strange angle up ahead. At first, I figured a car had just pulled over. Getting closer, I realized it was a church van, half off the shoulder and tilted down into a drainage ditch, hazards blinking through the freezing mist. Not a bad wreck, but bad enough. I pulled over and called it in before I even got out of my truck. The cold hit me like an open hand the second I stepped onto the road. Inside the van, I could see people moving around, mostly older folks, a senior choir group on their way back from a Thanksgiving Eve service at another church. A couple of them looked plain, scared. One woman was crying soft, and a man near the back was holding his arm funny. The driver, a young fellow who couldn't have been older than 25, was trying to keep everybody calm and not quite managing it. I climbed up the steps. "My name's Walter," I said. "Help's already coming." Just that one sentence took some of the panic out of the air. 31 years of utility emergencies teaches you something most people never learn, which is that folks can handle bad news fine. What they can't handle is not knowing. I moved through that van checking on people, and that's when I noticed it. A transformer pole leaning hard about 30 feet off, not down yet, but close, with a line sagging lower than any line ought to sag. Not touching anything yet, but close enough that the hair on my arm stood up regardless of the cold. I told everybody plain and clear, stay exactly where you are. Nobody climbs out, nobody walks toward that ditch. The driver listened, thank God. A few minutes later, I helped two of the older ladies step down once the first responders said it was clear. One of them shaking so bad I gave her the wool blanket I kept behind my seat for emergencies, just like this one, and the other one kept apologizing for being slow on the steps. I told her she walked faster than my late wife ever did, and that got a laugh out of her, even with her teeth chattering. Then my boot caught a patch of black ice I never saw coming. I went down hard on my left hip, and my right hand caught the edge of the van step on the way, splitting it open. For a second, I couldn't get a breath in. A firefighter half my age hauled me up by the armpit. "You good, sir?" "Depends how old you think I look right now," I told him. He laughed. I didn't, because my hip felt about 90 years old, and my hand was bleeding pretty good through my glove. By the time the EMTs had the scene squared away, a local news crew had shown up, the way they always seem to when bad weather makes for good footage. A reporter, young woman, microphone already out, asked me a couple of quick questions while they wrapped my hand. I answered without thinking much of it, cold and tired and ready to be done with the whole night. Television was about the last thing on my mind. Somewhere across town, my daughter was probably tucking the boys in after a night with Carol and Denny, and I had no idea that one clip from that interview was about to turn my whole life upside down. The EMT wanted me at the hospital. I wanted my own bed. We compromised. They cleaned the cut, taped it up good, checked that my hip wasn't broken, just bruised something fierce, and sent me home with a list of warning signs to watch for. By the time I walked through my own front door, it was close to midnight, the freezing rain still ticking against the windows. I eased myself down into my recliner, my hip protesting the whole way, and the television was still running coverage of the cold front. I closed my eyes for what I figured would be a minute. Then my phone went off like the 4th of July. Buzz, buzz, buzz. 3 missed calls and a string of texts arriving faster than I could read them. For one cold second, I thought something had happened to one of the grandbabies. Then Rachel called and I answered before the ring finished. "Dad?" She didn't sound nervous this time. She sounded shaken clean through. "Rachel, what's wrong?" A long pause, then crying, the real kind. "Dad, turn on channel 9. You're on it." I looked at the television. Sure enough, there I was, snow and sleet blowing sideways, An EMT wrapping my hand while I stood by that church van looking every bit of 58 years old and then some. They ran the clip again. Then a different angle. Then again. Apparently it had turned into one of the bigger local stories of the night. Everybody's fine, I told her. That's what matters. But that wasn't what she was upset about, and I could tell. Why didn't you tell me where you were tonight? She asked. I almost laughed. Not because it struck me funny, but because 11 hours earlier she'd told me precisely where I wasn't supposed to be. Didn't think it mattered, I said. That landed harder than I meant it to. Long silence. Finally she whispered, Dad, and then nothing else came out. We said goodnight, kind of awkward. No apology yet, no explanation either. Just a lot of confused quiet between us. 2 minutes later, Donna's sister Pam called, since word travels fast in a family. Then, 10 minutes after that, Marcus called, sounding unusually cheerful for a man whose father-in-law had just been hauling stranded seniors out of a ditch in the freezing rain. Walter, he said, quite a night, huh? Apparently, I said. There it was, the Marcus I knew, never able to leave a silence sitting there unfilled. He talked about the weather, about the news, about how wild the whole thing was, before finally landing on, Rachel feels terrible about all this. I didn't say anything. He filled the gap himself. She didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I still didn't say anything, because whether she meant to or not had stopped being the point a while back. The next morning, I woke up to more messages than I'd gotten in the last 5 years combined. Old coworkers from the power company, fellas I hadn't talked to since my retirement party, neighbors, people from church. Everybody had seen the clip. I spent the morning typing out some version of Glad You're Okay and saw you on the news. And around noon, my old crew foreman, a man named Curtis Hale, sent me a link with the message, You seen this yet? I clicked it. It wasn't footage of the rescue. It was a 20-second piece of the interview that had somehow already racked up thousands of views. The reporter standing next to the ambulance had asked me, Do you have family waiting on you for the holiday tonight? I barely remembered saying it. I'd been cold and tired and not thinking past the next 5 minutes. In the clip, I gave a tired little smile and said, Not this year. She looked surprised, followed up with, No Thanksgiving plans? And I said, My daughter asked me to sit this one out. That was the whole clip. No anger in it, no name-calling, just a tired man telling the truth, and people would not stop sharing it. The comments under it filled up fast. Hundreds of strangers telling their own stories about being shut out of holidays, about step-parents and in-laws who'd worked their way to the head of the table, about spending Thanksgiving alone in a quiet house. By that afternoon, a local radio host was talking about it on air. A mobile community page had it pinned at the top with 400 comments and climbing. I hated every bit of the attention and understood exactly why it had struck a nerve. Because loneliness past a certain age isn't something men like me are raised to talk about out loud. We'll talk about football and gas prices and which knee replacement surgeon to trust before we'll ever admit we got left off somebody's guest list. Around 4 that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Just 3 words. Can we talk? I looked at it a long while before setting the phone back down, not out of anger, just because I genuinely didn't have an answer yet. A few minutes later, a longer text came through. Dad, I found the scrapbook, the last page. My chest went tight because I knew exactly which page she meant. Not long after that, a message came in from a reporter at the press register, a woman named Denise Coker, asking if I'd sit down for an interview, not about the rescue, but about my life, my volunteer work, the man behind the clip everyone kept sharing. I ignored her call for a full day, then most of a second one. At 58, I'd learned that not every ringing phone deserves an answer, especially once half the town suddenly took an interest in a life that had been perfectly invisible to them for years. The rescue itself didn't bother me one bit. The attention did. I've never once in my life been comfortable being the center of anything. When you spend 3 decades fixing power lines, people only notice you when something's gone wrong, and once the lights come back on, nobody throws you a parade for it. That's just the job. Denise called again the next morning, then emailed, then called once more, until I finally gave in, mostly to make my phone quit buzzing. She was polite, professional, not sensational at all. Mr. Higgins, thank you for calling back. Just Walter's fine. Walter, I'd love to talk with you. I already told the television folks what happened out there. I'm not really interested in the wreck, she said. That got my attention. What are you interested in then? The people who keep bringing up your name, she said. Apparently, while I'd been busy avoiding my own phone, Denise had been making calls of her own, to old coworkers, to the shelter director, to a couple of the choir members from that van, even to a deacon at First Baptist. And every single one of them, it turned out, had a story about me I'd half forgotten myself. The shelter director told her I'd been showing up most weeks for 9 straight years. A former coworker mentioned a scholarship I'd quietly helped fund at the trade school, where I used to send apprentices for training, something I'd set up after Donna passed and never told a soul about. None of it felt heroic to me. Just ordinary things a man does when helping somebody beat sitting around listening to them struggle. Denise wanted to write about all of it. I told her no. She asked why. Because none of that matters, I said. She laughed, said, actually, I think that's exactly why it matters, which annoyed me some because it sounded smarter than my answer. We ended up talking almost 40 minutes, and by the time we hung up, I felt worn out, like I'd spent the afternoon defending myself against compliments. A few days later, her article ran online, then in the Sunday print edition, and it spread faster than the news clip ever had. Apparently, folks have a soft spot for quiet old men who mind their own business. Who knew? Meanwhile, Rachel kept texting most days, nothing pushy, just checking on my hip, asking how the hand was healing, trying to get a real conversation going. I answered, polite enough, but something in me had shifted. Not out of spite. I just didn't feel that old urgency anymore. The need to be the one chasing, the one calling first, the one keeping the bridge from falling down all by myself. For the first time in years, I let the silence sit there and let her notice it. One afternoon, she called while I was out in the garage trying to fix a wobbly shelf. Hey, Dad. Hey, yourself. You busy? A little. A pause then. Can we get lunch sometime soon? I tightened a bolt before answering. Maybe. That single word surprised the both of us. For years, my answer had always been yes before she finished the question. I could hear her trying to figure out what to do with maybe. We hung up without an argument and without a breakthrough either, just two people standing a little further apart than they used to. A week or so later, another story came out, this one not about me directly. A different local station had pulled together a piece on community kindness during the cold front, and somehow Marcus ended up getting interviewed on account of being family. That part didn't surprise me one bit. Marcus had a gift for finding a camera the way some men have a gift for finding the one open lane in traffic. On air, he called me a wonderful father-in-law, talked about how close our whole family was, how much we valued each other. The trouble wasn't anything he said. The trouble came right after, when the reporter turned to Rachel, who happened to be standing nearby, and asked a simple, harmless question. Did your father always volunteer like this? And Rachel hesitated, just a half second. Most people watching probably missed it entirely. Denise Coker did not, and neither did the internet. Within a day, people started connecting the dots on their own. Not ugly about it, just curious. If this family was so close, why had Walter spent Thanksgiving by himself? The question kept resurfacing in the comments under both clips, and nobody in that family had a good answer ready, especially not Rachel, especially not Marcus. For the first time since I'd known him, Marcus looked uncomfortable on camera, and I won't pretend that didn't give me a small, ugly little flicker of satisfaction. Part of me felt guilty watching it play out. Another part of me remembered sitting alone at my kitchen table while everybody else passed around the cranberry sauce. A man can feel both those things at once. That's just being human. About 2 weeks after that, Denise called again. You're not going to like this, she said. Then why call? She laughed. Because you're being honored. I about hung up the phone right then. No. Yes. No, Walter. I sighed. What now? Turned out the city was putting together a community recognition dinner. Mobile's quiet heroes of the season, honoring first responders, teachers, volunteers, regular folks who'd shown up when it counted, and somehow my name had landed on that list. I tried turning it down twice, maybe 3 times. The city wasn't having it. I learned something important right about then, which is that once enough people decide you're a hero, your own opinion on the matter stops mattering much at all. An official invitation showed up in my mailbox the following week. I set it on the counter and tried to forget about it until Denise called once more. You should probably go to this one, she said. Why's that? Found out something interesting. I rubbed my eyes. What now? Marcus's insurance office is sponsoring one of the tables, she said. I sat there quiet a second. Rachel and the boys will likely be there too. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Not nerves exactly, just the plain knowledge of what was coming. Sooner or later, every unfinished conversation comes looking to get settled. And after that Thanksgiving, there were plenty sitting unfinished between my daughter and me. The dinner landed on a Saturday evening in the middle of December at the Civic Center downtown. I almost didn't go, twice. That invitation sat on my counter near 2 full weeks while I found one excuse after another. Too much fuss, too many strangers, too much attention for a man who'd spent his whole career trying to be invisible. But eventually I ran clean out of excuses. I put on the navy blazer I'd worn to Donna's funeral, and not much since, and the sleeves fit tighter than I remembered, or maybe I'd gotten wider. Could have been either one. The lobby was loud with conversation when I walked in. City council folks, teachers, firefighters in their good uniforms, families dressed up and pretending not to read each other's name tags. My personal version of a nightmare. A volunteer handed me a program. "Congratulations, Mr. Higgins." I thanked her and went looking for the coffee table, since some habits never quit a man. That's when I spotted them. Rachel, Marcus, the boys, standing near one of the sponsor tables. Neither of us moved for a second. 30 feet of distance that felt a whole lot farther. Rachel saw me first, and her face went through about 3 emotions at once. Nervous, hopeful, guilty. I raised a hand, just a small wave, nothing dramatic. She waved back. Marcus nodded my way. Then the crowd shifted and swallowed up the view, and part of me was grateful for it. The program got underway not long after. A local news anchor running things, handing out awards to teachers and coaches and foster parents, folks who'd earned every bit of it. I spent most of that evening hoping my category would somehow get skipped over. No such luck. Eventually, the host walked up holding a card and said, "Our next honoree is a man who reminded this whole community what showing up looks like without asking for credit." I seriously considered the side exit. Too slow. The big screen behind him lit up with pictures. Me at the shelter, me at a trade school fundraiser years back, me standing by that church van in the sleet. The room applauded. I wanted my chair to swallow me whole. A minute later, they called me up, and the applause got louder, and I hated every second of it while somehow also being moved by it because people are complicated that way. I walked up those steps slow, my hips still not thrilled with sudden movement, and the host shook my hand and asked easy questions. How long had I volunteered? What got me started? Simple stuff. Then he asked the one I'd remember the rest of my life. "Walter, everybody's heard about the rescue by now. Looking back, what was the hardest part of that night?" I figured I'd give some safe answer about the weather or the ice. Instead, the truth just came out. No rehearsal to it at all. "Helping those folks wasn't the hardest part," I said. The room went quiet. The firefighters got there fast, the EMTs did their job, everybody pulled together. I paused a few seconds, no more than that. "The hardest part was finding out my daughter thought somebody else deserved my seat at her Thanksgiving table. You could have heard a pin drop in that whole civic center. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't named anybody, hadn't laid a single bit of blame on the table. But everybody understood exactly what I meant, Rachel, most of all. I saw her hands go up over her mouth, tears running quiet down her face, the kind of person tries hard to hide and can't quite manage. For 1 second, I regretted saying it out loud, not because it wasn't true, but because truth has weight, and once it's out in the room, you can't call it back. The host looked a little stunned himself, then handled it better than I expected, just nodded and said, "Thank you for your honesty," and let it sit there without trying to milk it for more. The applause that followed started soft, then grew, not for what I'd said exactly, but for the fact that I'd said it plain. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of handshakes and pictures. More attention thrown my way in one night than I'd gotten in the last decade put together. I finally slipped off toward the lobby, halfway to the door, when I heard, "Dad." I stopped. Rachel stood there by herself. Neither of us said anything for a second. Then she put her arms around me the way she used to when she was small, the way she hadn't in longer than I could remember. I hugged her back, because no matter what, she's still my daughter. When she stepped back, her eyes were red and swollen. "I'm so sorry," she said. No excuses tacked on, no mention of Carol or Marcus, just those 4 words. The plainness of it hit harder than any long speech could have. "Thank you," I said. She looked confused. "That's all?" "What else is there?" I asked her, smiling sad. More tears came. Then, can we fix this? I gave that a real think, longer than she expected. Finally, I said, maybe. Same word I'd handed her weeks back. Maybe, not no, not yes. Because forgiving somebody can happen fast. Trusting them again rarely does. I think she understood that without me explaining it further, because for once she wasn't pushing for an instant fix. We talked another 15 minutes or so, calm, honest, no fighting and no miracle either, just to start. Walking out to my truck after a light mist had started up again, same as that night out by the van. Only this time something in me sat different. People love a clean ending. I understand why. A clean ending feels good. Somebody says sorry. Somebody else forgives them. Everybody hugs. The credits roll. Real life rarely cooperates that tidy. After that dinner, Rachel and I didn't suddenly turn into the picture-perfect father and daughter again overnight. She didn't start showing up every Sunday with a casserole. I didn't pretend that Thanksgiving never happened. Will myself low and careful, two people picking their way across ice that hadn't fully set yet. The first week after, she called twice, and I answered both times. We talked about easy things, the boys, her work, my hip, nothing heavy. The second week, she asked if she could bring Tyler and Caleb by for lunch. I said yes, then spent the whole morning cleaning a house that didn't need cleaning, vacuumed it twice, bought juice boxes, picked up the little fruit snacks Caleb liked. At 11:30, she texted, "Tyler's running a fever. Can we push it to next week?" I stared at that message a good while. The old habits tried to come roaring back, the old hurt, the old voice telling me not to make a fuss over it. This time I didn't answer right away. I made coffee, sat down, and finally typed, "Sure thing, let me know when works." That was it. No guilt laid on, no extra sugar in it, no pretending the disappointment wasn't there. Just a small boundary, but mine to hold. Over the following months, I made a few quiet changes. Nothing dramatic, just practical. The kind nobody notices until they matter. I sat down with my attorney, a sharp woman named Sandra Pruitt, whose office always smelled like fresh coffee, and finally updated my will, my power of attorney, the beneficiary forms I'd been meaning to fix for years. She asked me plain, "Are you doing this out of anger, Walter?" I appreciated her asking. "No," I told her, out of clarity. She nodded, like that answer satisfied her. I didn't cut Rachel out of anything. That would have been cruel, and it wasn't what I wanted in my heart anyway. But I spread things out differently. Part still goes to her. Part goes into a trust for Tyler and Caleb's schooling, and part goes to the shelter in that trade school fund. For too many years, I'd let my family be the only proof my life had meant something. That was my mistake to fix, not theirs. They mattered plenty, but they weren't the only thing that did. A month later, Rachel called asking for help with a car down payment. Not a huge sum, but enough to notice. In years past, I'd have said yes before she finished the sentence. This time I asked a few questions first. "What happened to the savings you and Marcus had?" She sighed. "Marcus put some of it into a rental property his buddy was pushing." There it was again. I closed my eyes a second, not angry, just tired clean through. "Rachel, I can't do that one," I told her. Silence. Then, "You can't? Or you won't?" "I can't," I said. "I'm retired, and I've got to stop fixing problems I didn't create." That landed somewhere real. I could hear it. She didn't argue, just said okay, quiet. I figured there'd be some resentment under that, maybe there was. But a week later she called again, not asking for a single dime, just to talk. That was the first real sign things might actually heal. I kept volunteering through the winter, the shelter shifting back toward regular outreach, coat drives, small repair jobs, helping folks fill out paperwork they didn't understand. One Thursday, a familiar face walked through the door. Miss Geraldine Tate, 76 years old, one of the choir ladies off that church van, white hair, sharp eyes, the kind of posture that dared anybody to feel sorry for her. She pointed straight at me. "You." I looked behind myself. "Me?" "Don't act surprised," she said. "You're the one who kept telling me to quit apologizing for walking slow on those icy steps." I laughed. "Well, you were apologizing plenty." She started coming by every Thursday after that, organizing the donated coats with the seriousness of a drill sergeant, correcting anybody who dared put children's mittens in the adult bin like they'd committed a federal crime. I liked her right off. Rachel met her once, a little awkward at first, until Geraldine shook her hand and announced, "Your father's stubborn, but he's useful." Rachel laughed. So did I. That laugh felt like a small repair all its own. Not the whole thing fixed, but enough to notice. By early spring, Rachel and I were having dinner together once a month. Just the two of us, no Marcus, no in-laws, no pressure sitting on the table between us. Some nights we talked about old memories, other nights about everything that had gone wrong. One evening over catfish at a little place out on the bay, she admitted something. "I think I was trying so hard not to upset Carol and Denny that I forgot I was hurting you." I cut into my fish before answering. "That sounds about right." She winced at that. I didn't soften it, not to be cruel. Just because the truth, spoken kindly, is still allowed to be the truth. She nodded. "I know." Come August, a letter arrived from the state capitol, Alabama's Senior Volunteer Recognition Award. I figured it was junk mail at first, until Denise Coker called and told me it wasn't. The city had put my name forward without telling me. The ceremony would be up in Montgomery, formal event, one guest allowed. I knew what everybody expected. Even Rachel expected it. She didn't say so outright, but I could hear the hope sitting in her voice when I mentioned the invitation. "That's wonderful, Dad," she said. "Strange, but wonderful," I agreed. "Do you know who you're bringing?" she asked. There it was. I looked out my back window at the bird feeder, at the empty spot on the porch where our old dog used to sleep in the sun. "I do," I told her. A pause. "Oh, not angry, just quiet." "I'm taking Geraldine," I said. Another pause, then Rachel surprised me. "That's good, Dad. She should be there." I could hear the sadness underneath it, but also the understanding, and that's the moment I knew the two of us might actually turn out fine someday, not because she got what she wanted, but because she'd learned to accept what she didn't. The ceremony in Montgomery turned out nicer than I'd figured. Geraldine wore a navy dress and complained about the parking the whole 20 minutes we circled the block. When they called my name, she squeezed my arm and whispered, "Don't trip, old man." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," I told her. "Anytime," she said. I walked up onto that stage with a sore hip, a wider waist than I had at 30, and a heart that had finally quit chasing after the wrong kind of approval. Afterward, Geraldine and I had dinner at a little diner near the Capitol. She ordered pie, I had coffee, and we talked about nothing important: weather, bad drivers, good gumbo. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Proud of you, Dad." I smiled, then set the phone down. Not because it didn't matter to me, but because I'd finally figured out I didn't need a message from my daughter to make the night feel worth something on its own. That turned out to be the only kind of revenge I ever wanted, though I never set out to get any. No yelling, no public takedown, no ruined holiday dinner. Just one tired old man learning, later than he should have, that love was never supposed to come with an application form. I still love my daughter, always will. But I've quit mistaking being needed for being valued, and I no longer save a seat at my table for people who only remember I'm sitting there once the cameras start rolling. Sometimes the people you gave the best of your life to forget your worth until a stranger reminds them out loud. If anybody listening tonight has ever felt overlooked by the family you'd have walked through fire for, I hope you hear this much. You still matter. And if this story found something true in you, tell me your own down in the comments. Somebody out there tonight might need to hear it just as much as you did. Sometimes the people we love hurt us without meaning to, and the hardest part isn't the hurt itself, it's deciding what we do with it next. Walter didn't get even. He got clear he kept showing up for strangers while quietly making room for himself at his own table. That's the real fix. Love folks fully, but never shrink yourself waiting to be chosen. You're worth choosing on your own. Lưu ý nhỏ. Câu chuyện trên Do AI sáng tạo và hư cấu nhằm mang lại giá trị giải trí cho người nghe, đồng thời gửi gắm một bài học sống tích cực, mong bạn đón nhận với tinh thần nhẹ nhàng.